And so it is with much honor that I would like to call upon David Harris.
Shana Tova. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for the risk of inviting me back. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a college graduation, and that was something new and novel for me. So I did some study of the literature on what makes a successful keynote graduation speaker at one of America's colleges. And I discovered that arguably the most successful speech ever was the speech of Salvador Dali, the late Spanish artist who came to Syracuse University some years ago to fulfill that role. He stood up before the thousands of graduates and their proud parents and grandparents, and he said, "I'm going to be so brief that I've already finished." For which he got a sustained standing ovation. So if I were smart, I would follow his example. But I suspect Rabbi Greenberg invited me to say a few more words, and I'm privileged that he afforded me this opportunity. We know in America that there is a congenital disease, that no matter what the subject or occasion, a speaker needs to begin with a joke. But there's an old Jewish wives' tale from Eastern Europe that says, don't tell a joke to a Jewish audience. If you tell a joke to an audience of mujiks, of peasants, they will laugh 3 times. The first time when you tell the joke, the second time when you explain the joke, and the third time when they get the joke. But if you dare tell a Jewish audience the same joke, they will interrupt you 3 times. The first time to tell you they already know the joke. The second time to remind you you're not telling the joke accurately. And the third time to finish the joke for you. But since I'm such an embedded American speaker, just one joke. In New England, there was a small village with 2 houses of worship, a synagogue and a Catholic church. And the rabbi and the priest over the years forged a very warm and special friendship. So much so that when the priest was called away for an emergency, he made the unusual request to his friend, the rabbi, if he would help out in the church, specifically in the confessional box. The rabbi was rather flabbergasted, but didn't want to disappoint his friend. And so he said, "Of course, my friend, I'll do whatever you ask of me, but show me how." The priest said, "Really, it's not very difficult. Come sit in the confessional box with me, and I'll give you the ropes." So they sit together, crammed into the confessional box, and after a few minutes, a man comes and says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The priest says to the man, "Tell me about your sin." He says, "I have committed adultery." The priest says, "How many times?" The man says, 3. The priest says, "My son, put $5 in the poor box, say 2 Hail Marys, and sin no more." He looks at the rabbi, and the rabbi says, "Okay, getting the feel for this." A few minutes later, a woman comes along and says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The priest says, "And what is your sin, my daughter?" And she says, "I have committed adultery." He says, "How many times?" She says, 3. He says to her, "My daughter, say 2 Hail Marys, put $5 in the poor box, and sin no more. He then turns to the rabbi and says, "You think you get it?" The rabbi says, "Go deal with your emergency. I'll handle it." A few minutes pass. A man comes, and he says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The rabbi says, "I'm on familiar terrain here. Tell me, my son, how many times, what have you sinned?" He says, "I've committed adultery." The rabbi says, "How many times?" He says, "Once." The rabbi says, "My son, we have a special this week, 3 for $5. We, Jews, on a more serious note, tend to think that it's the other religion that thinks in clusters of 3, Trinitarians. But the rabbi reminded us just a few moments ago that the essence of this moment in our lives is the convergence of teshuvah, tefila, and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and charity. So in the spirit of not Trinitarianism, but trilogisms, allow me 3 serious thoughts on this day of Rosh Hashanah here in my congregation. In a sense, ladies and gentlemen, each of us here, broadly speaking, is a survivor. I know the word has taken on a very specific, even sacred meaning, and rightly so, to refer to a generation that is still represented in this congregation and in my own family. But in a broader sense of the meaning, we are all survivors. George Will, the columnist, recently wrote in a piece defending Israel that had there not been the intervention of the anti-Semites, the Jewish people today would number easily more than 200 million. But there was that intervention along the way, and I suspect in our family trees it informs each and every one of our family histories. Directly or indirectly, we are all the survivors of the teaching of contempt, of the charge of deicide. We are all survivors of the Damascus blood libel. We are all survivors of the abduction of Edgardo Mortara, the Italian child taken by the church in the middle of the 19th century and forcibly converted. We are all survivors of the Inquisition and the Auto da Fe and the expulsion from Britain and the ghetto and the ghetto and the ghetto. We are all survivors of the Black Hundreds and the pogromchiks and the Cossacks. We are all survivors of the discriminatory laws that permeated too many parts of the world, including this blessed land. We are all survivors of the alphabet created for us, uniquely for us, in Germany 70 years ago, an alphabet that began with the letter A for Auschwitz and ended with the letter Z for Zyklon B. Each and every one of us is a survivor whose families defied the repeated attempts to isolate us, to convert us, to forcibly assimilate us, to murder us. But we are here. We are here as proud Jews. With our heads up, we are not apologetic Jews. We are not self-flagellating Jews. We are Jews who take enormous pride in our history, in our faith, in our determination, and not least in our contribution to human civilization and to the moral conscience of the world. And that's the point I wish to make. None of us is a survivor for the sake of survival alone. We're not here simply to defy the anti-Semites. nor should we allow a heritage of which we are the heirs and trustees to be reduced to nothing more than a few comic lines out of the mouth of Ben Stiller or Mel Brooks or Jerry Seinfeld or Woody Allen, funny though they may be at a given moment in time. We're about much more than that. We're not about the submission of Islam. We're not about the afterlife. We're not about self-indulgence. We are a people who were placed on this earth, we believe, to serve as a moral guide and a moral conscience for a world that until our appearance believed in child sacrifice and the worship of stones. As Adlai Stevenson once said, perhaps the greatest contribution of the Jewish people to the world was moral choice, the recognition that we are partners of a higher authority, however we choose to interpret that higher authority. We are partners in this life, in our time, and as the rabbi said earlier so eloquently, in finite time, we are partners with an obligation to seek to do what we can within our capacity to humanize a world desperately in need of greater kindness. That's why we're here, and not simply to defy those who would wish us dead. And we have to return in this period, I believe, to reaffirming why we exist, the why of being Jewish, and the what and the how of being Jewish. In our own unique and distinctive ways, yes, but in common purpose, recognizing that our future must be ahead of us and not behind us. Our best days must lie there and not there. And secondly, in this period, I believe that an essential part of our being Jewish is our connection to the land and birthplace and cradle of the Jewish people. I travel the world, as the rabbi said, and I meet with Jewish communities in every corner, nook and cranny. And I must tell you honestly that nowhere else in the diaspora is there a community like this one. But before you get too cocky, it's both good and bad. It's good because nowhere else is there a community as strong, as organized, as influential, with as great an impact on the public policy of a superpower nation, the United States, as ours. And that allows us to fulfill a unique role in Jewish life with respect both to Israel and to other diaspora Jewish communities. 10 days ago, I was in Bulgaria and Greece. We took with us the leaders of those communities to meet their leaders, their president, their prime minister, their foreign minister, because the perceived strength of American Jewry opened the doors not only for us, but for them, and opened the ears of their political leaders to what was on our agenda. That's the strength of who we are. The weakness, if you'll allow me, is that in no other diaspora Jewish community that I know, neither Canada nor Mexico, neither Argentina nor Australia, neither South Africa nor France, is there as tenuous a commitment to Israel as there is in this country. Maybe it's the sense that we are geographically distant, but so is Canada, and even more so Australia. Maybe it's the sense that we are so well rooted that we don't have to think of Israel as a future home or refuge. We're here, they're there, we wish them well, but our focus is here.